The Edelman Barometer, the research report that annually measures trust in institutions, found at the start of this year that trust in the media is at a low surpassed only in 2011 in the wake of the phone hacking scandal. It also found that trust is so corroded that in general people trust leaked information much more than traditional news sources these days, and also algorithms over human editors. One recent example might be the appointment as editor of a daily paper read by more than 2 million Londoners of the very recently departed Chancellor. Now, it's a difficult argument, I would say, to make that this appointment was due not to a close relationship and convergent interests between that recently departed Chancellor and the owner of said paper, but to George Osborne's proven competence and experience in journalism. So in these circumstances of declining trust, what can we do that might provide an antidote? Well, one possibility is to engage with your readership in much deeper ways so that they become more than just readers, more even than just subscribers, to build a readership into contributors in various ways, and eventually into something that can meaningfully be called a community. So the potential of this is significant. To build a more democratic media industry in which people feel that have a genuine stake and a genuine say in how their news is produced, and thus establish a kind of virtuous circle which builds trust and support between readers and journalists and editors. But of course it's not a magic bullet. Even when done well, as these guys will tell you, it's no easy task. But we do have three of the pioneers of this kind of building of community journalism, as I like to call it. Peter Geoghegan from The Ferret, who do amazing investigative work up in Scotland. Hazel Healy, co-editor of The New Internationalist, who have recently added 3,647 new co-owners to their business model for a community share offer. And Cantwell-Corn, one of the founders of the Bristol Cable. So, Peter, actually I'd like to start with you, if that's possible. Just talk around some of the challenges, but also the benefits that you guys have seen from crowdsourcing, not just funding for the organisation, but also some investigations as well.
Cool. I've written some notes on my little iPad, so I'll flick down at them as and when I forget what I'm going to say. Yeah, so remarkably, given the temperatures we're experiencing at the moment, I'm here to talk a little bit about trying to build community journalism in a cold climate, both figuratively and metaphorically. So what is The Ferret? I guess a lot of you mightn't have heard. So The Ferret, we're a cooperative journalism project based up in Scotland. We've been running for about 2 years. And like a lot of other journalism startups, we're funded by a mixture of kind of income streams. Our main funding comes from subscriptions. We've over 500 paying subscribers who pay between £3 a month and £100 a year to support what we do. We also do crowdfunders. We have some grant funding. We run conferences and trainings. We do various things. We link up with media organisations. And what we're trying to do really is to try and kind of to bootstrap and create an investigative platform that serves a core of readers and core of users. And this tension between readers and community and users was something I'm going to try and tease out a little bit more. But at its nub, what we emerged from was a sense that there was a gap in the media landscape where we were, a similar gap across for investigative journalism. You know, paginations decreasing in newspapers, budget's been squeezed. Well, what do we do, and how do we create a new model that actually allows us to engage with people who really want to support our work rather than just have the traditional model of we publish, here you go, and readers read, and there's no interface between. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Most of the money we raise, so we raise about £2,000 a month. We've been going. We initially launched in 2015, so we've been about 2 years now. Most of the money we raise gets spent on journalism. We have very low overheads. We spend only about £150 a month on overheads. So we run a disaggregation newsroom. Our the daily business of running the organisation is done on Slack, and we plan in that way. So we don't have a physical space, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too. Last year we also got a grant from Google's Digital News Initiative, the DNI grants. We got €50,000 from the man, and so the man is currently paying for our first full-time employee, which has been very good. We've got a fact-checking website. That's what we got funded to build, called FFS. Did you get that? Yeah, you see, Ferret's FFS, and that was launched in April. We really are very dedicated to kind of engaging with readers and subscribers. Our model is a cooperative model, and one of the reasons we decided to kind of build a cooperative structure was when we originally, when the project started, and actually the project was kind of the brainchild of a small group of really investigative journalists based in Scotland who were freelance. And we had an FOI session a few years ago. I organised an event, we had a few speakers, went to the pub afterwards, we started talking. And this is where it's kind of come from. And this is some of the challenges we've had around community building. Maybe it's the fact that we are probably traditional journalists trying to become community development people, and I think there's a challenge for that. But one of the areas that we, as well as kind of identifying a lack of funding for investigative journalism, I think we also identified a lack of trust, and the idea of trust you're bringing up there, and that what needed to be a way for an audience to have trust in the media they're consuming. And one of the ways we've thought that would be to actually set up a cooperative structure. So a cooperative structure means everyone who subscribes, there's many different types of cooperative structures, but in our cooperative structure, everyone who subscribes to the Ferret automatically becomes a member of the cooperative. Once you're a member of cooperative, you have voting rights to come up with cooperative. So we have cooperative members who are readers who are on our board, and so everyone who joins is able to come to our AGM, to vote for people onto the board, to vote down other people, etc., etc. And what we were trying to do with that was to kind of create a structure for engagement. And it's interesting looking back to the early days. We spent quite a number of years really discussing the idea behind the Ferret before we ever launched it. There was two reasons for that. One was political. We were talking in the kind of, this is Scotland 2013, 2014, very febrile political atmosphere, which it seems now everywhere is a febrile political atmosphere. It kind of feels like just that's what it is now. But back then it seemed like an anomaly. So we felt like we should wait until that had passed, and then we would launch. But then that never passed, so we just launched anyway. But the other reason why we didn't launch was we struggled to figure out how to do this, how to launch a new venture like this. Do you just try and launch a whole new kind of digital platform where the chances of it failing are actually really quite high? We saw in Scotland in particular a lot of new digital media ventures go up like this, bring in some money and then collapse. So what we decided to do instead was to have a crowdfunder just for one investigation. It's a kind of proof of concept. So in the summer of 2015, we kind of said, look, we're launching, this is who we are, and we gave our audience, who basically were just the Twitter followers of each of the individual journalists really, a choice of three broad areas that they would like to see investigated. So I think we gave them the NHS in Scotland, asylum and fracking. And fracking at the time was a very big political subject. So they voted for fracking, so we set up a crowdfunder. I think we asked for quite a small, modest amount of money, like £3,500. We got about 10 grand. And that kind of bootstrapped the organisation, and we felt like we were off and running. So at the start, so there was a real attempt with us to try and build engagement. But building the structures of engagement is not quite the same as actually engaging with your audience. And today I'm going to talk about some of the different practical ways the Ferrets try to engage with the community, but also some of the challenges we've had as well. And as I say, our model is based on subscribers. So the subscribers provide, and we're very, very, from the start, we've never gone in for looking for huge amounts of grant funding beyond the Google grant, because I've always been very conscious, as of other directors, that if you end up as an organisation very heavily grant dependent, then it brings its own momentum into it. As somebody who used to work in kind of community development stuff in Northern Ireland, I'm aware of how you end up with this kind of, the grant becomes the thing you chase. So we were very kind of conscious of that. So one of the reasons why subscriptions, because subscribers, I'm sure it's some things that the panel members will be able to talk to more, because subscribers are a much more solid base, a ballast to your organisation, that's much more dependable income. We were very keen to try and engage with our subscribers. But what's the difference between a subscriber and a reader? What's that relationship like, say, for an organisation like the Ferret? So last week we published a big investigation into the far right in Scotland. We did it in tandem with the Daily Record. It was a big investigative story, involved undercover work, a lot of digging, a lot of people doing brave work. Big splash in the front page of the Daily Record on a Monday. I think we had 6,000 views in 24 hours, which is very high for our website. But it didn't actually translate into all that many new users and new subscribers, and there's a question there, I guess, about where do our subscribers fit vis-a-vis our readers. We do work in the guiding principle that strong original stories will translate into subscriptions. Now that is borne out, we do see that when we publish strong original content, it does tend to kind of generate subscriptions. But what's the difference between an active community and subscribers? You know, the New Yorker's got over 1 million subscribers, so has the Economist. But I don't think you'd really say that I subscribe to New Yorker. I don't consider myself a member of a community. That doesn't, I don't feel like I'm part of, I think it's a very weird way of thinking if you thought like that. So, and so that's one of the kind of things that we're trying to think about is how do you bridge that kind of democratic and media gap with your audience? And how do you build trust? Because our journalism, and it was interesting listening to Mark Lee Hunter's talk there as well, because you're thinking about, well, if your journalism is serving a community, what is that community and what are they trying to get out of it? Because one of the things we are trying to do as well is to kind of promote active citizenship. We run workshops in which we do things around, say, FOI, fact-checking. The idea is to try and deliver transferable skills to communities, to audiences who want to pick up on it. But building a community is not easy, especially when, as the case of the Ferret, we're geographically dispersed across Scotland. So I'm based in Glasgow. I teach journalism in Ayr, which is kind of the southwest of Scotland. A lot of our core group are actually in Edinburgh. We have some members in Fife. So there's kind of a challenge around that. And one of the primary ways we try to do is public events, because public events don't yield a huge amount of income and they are quite time intensive to run, but I do think they build a lot of returns in terms of actually building a relationship between you and the community that you're serving and deepening that. We launched our FFS project recently with a discussion on kind of some of these issues around post-truth, post-fact, etc., in Glasgow. I think we have 50 people along at that, kind of waiting this, and there was a real impetus there. If you build stuff, there is a tendency that people will come. It's just about trying to understand that this will take time and energy, and often, for journalists as well, it feels like, well, this isn't journalism, this isn't writing a story, this is something else, and that's also a step change, I think, as well. And our events kind of do range from something like that with 50 people. We also had an AGM last year. I think we had about 80 or 100 people at it. We do that again this year. To kind of very small things. So I was just telling Adam there, we're running a housing investigation at the moment, and we've been running a crowdfunder about this, looking into housing and homelessness, which obviously is becoming increasingly, kind of pertinent issue given the awful events of recent weeks. But we had an event in Edinburgh, and I think we had one person turn up. So there is that challenge. But the one person that turned up actually was really engaged in the subject and brought loads of knowledge to it. So there is a need to kind of balance between quality and quantity. And again, actually, it speaks to some of the stuff that Mark Lee Hunter was talking about. The bigger challenge we have found is to bring our audience and our subscribers into the heart of the Ferret as an organisation. We've no physical space, as I said, which has advantages, particularly financial, but it means we don't have a clear rallying point where people can come to, where people can see, look, that's where the Ferret is. And our cooperative structure allows our subscribers to become very involved in the day-to-day running of the Ferret. And some have. So our board has broadened out. So the overall board of the Ferret now is 11 members, 5 of whom are reader members, so they're subscribers, and they're not journalist members, so they're very engaged. But the challenge we have is to kind of, how do we let subscribers be involved but not at that level? A lot of subscribers don't want to be involved. That's a lot of commitment. That's coming to board meetings. That's a certain level of commitment. How do you bring people into the project that don't want to be that involved, especially with a project like ours where we have our member of staff paid a Google grant, but the rest of us really are almost pro bono. We're paid small amounts of money, and it's almost a volunteerism. So how do you bring people into a kind of what is almost a kind of ersatz voluntary organisation? And so that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out. One way we've been trying to address this, as I was saying, is through kind of events. So the events are time where you can bring people into the organisation and say, look, this is what we're doing. And the fact-checking has been a good way of doing that. So we're trying to roll out a series of events where we actually go across the country and give people a chance to see, look, this is what we're doing. We're actually having one in Edinburgh on July the 9th, so if anyone wants to come to Edinburgh, you can do. We have discussion events and film screenings and things like that. And if I have one piece of advice, it would be quite an obvious advice. If you're doing events, make sure you do something that adds value, and the audience will come away feeling that they've learned something useful. Whether it's a debate on fake news or something that's really actually practical, where people are actually feeling that they're getting some sort of either skills or an insight into something. And I just want to go back to this distinction between readers, subscribers, and actually what Tom mentioned in his introduction, an active community. And what we're really trying to do is a 3-step process. You're trying to turn a reader, because we have a paywall. So if you hit the paywall, you can get 3 articles a month free, then you hit the paywall. That's the point at which we try to turn a reader into a subscriber. Once someone's a subscriber, once someone gives money to the Ferret, how do we turn them then into an active community member? how do we turn them into somebody who's actually going to be kind of involved? The simplest way we can do this is developing an online community, and that's something we are trying to do and have tried to do. One easy way of doing it, say, is social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But that kind of interaction can be quite shallow. And so we've set up a dedicated online community forum where we post links to stories, we post discussions, and all the rest. It runs off our main website. It's a place where our users can go and talk. But actually, so far as well, that's proved quite tricky to get people to post onto it. So most of the posts are still from us. So we're still the people who are trying to encourage debate on it on the forum. Partly that speaks to the way in which people will comment on a Facebook post much more readily than they will go onto community forum and comment on something. And it also speaks to something I think a bit wider that we've learned from doing the Ferret. When we initially started the Ferret and decided to adopt a cooperative structure, we were very concerned. We spent many hours, now in retrospect kind of wasted hours, discussing what would happen if people came in and took over the organisation as a cooperative. You know, people could just, almost like a form of entryism, people could decide to enter the cooperative and kind of defenestrate all of us and take the project in ways that we didn't want it to go. To be honest, we've had the opposite problem, really. We have struggled to get people to want to be that involved. You know, we've had people come onto the board who kind of, say, come to the AGM and then slightly fallen away, you know, and that will happen, but I guess I have to say that was one area. So if you're looking to go down this way, I would say don't worry as much about that. But for me, the key to engaging community is to do things that your community care about. And how do you find out about it? You ask them. I think that's the best way to find out what your community cares about. And something we're still working on. As I mentioned, when we launched, we did ask our kind of nebulous potential audience, what would you like us to investigate? We've done that since. We've currently got this crowdfunder into homelessness and housing in Scotland. That also springs from a kind of asking our readers what they want us to investigate. And that kind of helps, I think, to build both your community, and it gives your community a sense of a say in what you're trying to do and allows them to feel more engaged. I think there's a lot more that we could do in this area. I was in Bruges at the European Journalism Festival in April, and I was very interested to hear from Discourse Media who are in Canada, and they've been sending journalists literally out into the country. You know, they've been like kind of going on road trips and just asking people, they go, what would you like us to do? And I think that's really interesting. I think there's a direction of travel, I think, for a lot of organisations like ours about going out literally into communities and saying, well, what is it how can we serve you better, rather than just to kind of, we're going to go off and do the story and here you go. And I think there's a lot that can be done in that. And what we also try to do is try and involve the community more directly once we have published something. So when we publish our stories, we put all the source documents on our website. So there's a resource there that people can tap into. People can see how we've reached the conclusions we've reached, but also they can take those documents and do something else with them. And this is something, you know, we often ask that of our readers. You know, by all means, go in and take these documents. We've done a big FOI. Say we've done a big FOI story on, you know, we did one recently on. We've done quite a number of large FOI, kind of council-wide FOI stories. We've done one about council investments and ethical investments. You know, that's all up on the website. People can then go in and take the information, see what they want to do with it. We also, for example, we did the Panama Papers. So the Panama Papers documents were released whenever that happened. It was quite kind of down and dirty kind of data journalism. We just made a map very quickly and stuck up all the map there and said to our audience, right, you go on out there and see what you want to do with it. You know, there's an ethical question around that. These people hadn't committed a crime or whatever, and there was some people saying you shouldn't do this. But I think we felt that our audience, I think that's where there's always kind of considerations, and we felt this is something that our audience wanted, and there was huge engagement with that, and a lot of our audience started, you know, digging in and looking at stuff, and that also gives us an opportunity to suggest to our audience, oh, if you look here, if you look on Companies House, you can see where these companies are, see if they're registered in the UK, and again that helps to build an awareness in your audience about how to find information, how to process information, how to analyse information, and that's kind of thing we are very, I do think that helps to build your community. And in general, we're big believers in transparency. I think that's really important for building trust. So we published quarterly transparency reports. So we say what our income was for the previous quarter. We say how much money was paid to different people. We go through all the processes and say to our readers and our members that this is where your money goes and this is how it's spent. I think that's been a very successful thing to do, because it allows your readers to see, okay, this is where our money goes. I think that's been very useful. We still have a long way to go, I think, in terms of community building, and there's still challenges. I think we particularly structurally, and how to create structures within which your community, you know, because if you think about a newsroom traditionally, how would you get a community involved in a traditional newsroom? You know, would you bring them in and get them to sit in the corner, or would you want them to get involved online, or what would that look like? But my experience at the fair has taught me anything is building communities, I think, is integral to the future of this kind of community journalism, and particularly investigative journalism, because your communities have knowledge, they've got embedded knowledge, they're in places, they've got ideas and stories, and they're really, you know, they're a rich, rich asset if you can work with them and be part of them. And I think it's no longer enough to say, you know, I just want to do the journalism, let me get on and do the journalism. Creating an audience that both facilitates and receives the journalism we're doing, I think, is really key to the future of community journalism, probably wider journalism as well. That's it.
Thanks, Peter, that's great. If we could jump actually to Adam now.
Yep.
Because I know you guys took the decision not to have a paywall, possibly a slightly rarer decision for kind of new startup journalism outlets to go with print as well as online content.
Yep.
So yeah, if you could just talk
Yeah,
about
absolutely, I'll speak to that. I've got some slides, so give me a sec. Hello everybody, thanks Tom, thanks everyone. My name's Adam, I am one of the co-founders of the Bristol Cable, which is a features and investigations-led media cooperative based in the city of Bristol. We publish online almost every day or every couple of days, and a quarterly print edition of 30,000 copies that is distributed for free. You can pick one up there or out in the foyer. But specifically today I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to talk around issues around building a community, breaking out of the echo chamber, if you can do that, and basically how we're going about trying to find a new model for investigative and features-based journalism. So first of all, cooperative media. For us, cooperative media is both a core value, as in a social value, and also a business model. And I'll speak to why we think that. But first of all, what does it actually mean? Being a cooperative means that you have some sort of legal form, but also there's different scales of actually how democratic or how involved people are. So if you can see our cable fun null, the basic principle of how we organize with our 1,700 members is that at the widest possible point, which is the top of the funnel, are issues of principle, strategy, overall direction, like that. And that's where we get people involved to give mandates or to give feedback or to vote on issues. And basically, as it filters down to execution and actual implementation, it goes to the coordinators team, which at the moment is about 10 people, depending on how you count the hours, and then down to individual working groups or individual journalists or people. So really, like kind of what Peter mentioned, one of the big struggles for us actually is we've got 1,700 members and we want to get people involved in what we're doing. But often what we encounter is the dynamic where we're like, we've got our AGM or we've got our meeting coming up, would you like to come involved? You can participate in discussions and decisions and lead the way of the co-op. And often what we encounter is actually, oh, well, I would, but I think you're really doing a great job. And so that's actually kind of a struggle for us, and it means that sometimes we're facing a situation where we are trying to find ways to get people involved. One of the ways that we've found, basically, to get people involved is a nice mix of practicalities and controversies. So this is a graph from our latest AGM, which was in April this year, where we had about 120 members who operated in working groups and moved through an agenda of key decisions, ethical questions, practical issues, policy and strategy, and so on. And here is just something a little bit about where we asked the members to inform us in what direction and how we should be using our resources. And so you see there's obviously a major emphasis on media in print, both on online, but also significant votes for education events and multimedia, which obviously feeds into those other aspects. Another issue, which is slightly more conceptual, slightly more political, is how the cable should, if at all, be involved in campaigning journalism and what campaigning journalism means. It was touched on earlier. I heard someone talking about earlier about the breakdown in sort of objectivity. I was in the previous session, and about how, particularly now, there's a kind of somewhat urgency for media that could represent particular positions or ideas or interpret interpretations of the world around us and insights in the world around us. So the first question we asked people was, the cable does push for political and policy changes, and that's the green bars there. And then the second question was, the cable should push for political and policy changes. And from that, within a massive room over 2 or 3 hours of meeting with various different agenda points, we had people discussing really key and quite vexed issues on how should we move forward as an organisation, where should we put our resources, what political choices should we make as we navigate a journalistic and community environment. But a cooperative is not just about the decision making and the meetings and everything else, as has been touched on repeatedly, and I think absolutely correctly. It's about community building. So how do we break out of the echo chamber? I've struck through echo chamber here because I'm not sure if it's possible, and I don't think we're doing it as well as we could, so I've put expanding the echo chamber anyway. And at least, broadening out the tent of what we're doing. And so picking up on what Tom mentioned, the print magazine. Like I said, we published 30,000 free copies of a print magazine with investigations, features, voices, alternative local histories, infographics, and so on. And we distribute them all over the city. This is kind of a zoomed-in map of distribution locations, over 650 in the city. So that's mosques, churches, cafes, bars, libraries, universities, transport hubs, anything like that. And we also, on a rotating basis, distribute door-to-door through people's letterboxes. So that's really an important way in which we get out into communities and put something in front of them and say, here's this, let us know what you think. Consume it. It's free to access. That's one of our sort of taglines, free to access, as in it's paid for by someone, but we want to maintain the principle of having it available for everybody to have at any point that they want, as the NHS should be. And, but if you want to, you can become a member. But unfortunately, or fortunately, however way you look at it, like it or not, in this era, it feels like the journalism is just not enough on its own. It needs to have the value added and the emphasis of the value, at least, conveyed in a proper and persuasive way. So how do you turn what we're doing here by producing journalism into a viable business model? And the main thing around that is to build a community. Because otherwise, you end up in a situation like this, particularly if you have a commitment to free media. This is a cartoon from The New Yorker, which I thought absolutely exemplified so much of free at the point of distribution media. There's a man saying $1 to see the elephant, and it's there for everybody to see, and he's on the phone saying business is terrible. And that's something that we would and potentially do face. We put all of this effort into producing the magazine and producing the online journalism, and then we give it all away for free, and then we ask people to pay a minimum of £1 a month, although on average people pay about £3 a month. And obviously some people won't necessarily, and that will always be the case. But how do we push people to move beyond passively consuming media to actively become members of our community, subscribers and payers and friends and supporters of what we do? So the first thing, and I'm going to leave the journalism to the side a little bit because it's a little bit more self-explanatory, is the education and training. So we do lots of ad hoc education and training across the city, usually for free or very, very cheap. The really good example of that was an extensive program that we ran late last year and into early this year called the Bristol Cable Media Lab. And that was 10 sessions in the fundamentals of quality journalism, where we recruited by application 15 people of all different backgrounds and experiences from across the city to do 10 sessions on everything from FOI, Companies House, data, interviewing, video journalism, and with the support of the CIJ and some very, very helpful and experienced journalists, we managed to put on an amazing program. And now we have a lot of people who are contributing to our to the magazine and also potentially forging a career in journalism. And so what that does is it performs one of our social aims, which is kind of diversifying the pool of people who have access to media, both demographically, but also in terms of the ideas and the values and the experience that they bring. and also demonstrating to our public and to our potential members and our existing members that we are really representing the city, we're representing the community, and expanding the pool of knowledge and opportunities for people around us. The next aspect is a variety of different events. So we do a lot of events that are based broadly around journalism, so that's film screenings or talks, panel discussions, whether that be exiled journalists, like for example this woman at the top left is an exiled journalist from Sudan, or discussions around particular issues that have happened, film screenings by local or international filmmakers, walking tours that don't really have that much relation to what we do at the Cable, but are an interesting aspect of the city to give different views and perspectives. And also, more broadly, as I mentioned, trainings and stuff, as well as music nights, because we're also trying to build, part of building a community is to be multifaceted. You need the social element, I believe, also the sort of the professional and organizational element too, to kind of make it coherent and make it cohesive, to pull people together and so you can carry on. And then obviously there's the journalism. We always do local stories, except that they are almost always also national stories. So what we try to find is the local examples of bigger national stories, whether that's on the housing crisis, police surveillance, investments, offshore tax funding, offshore tax havenry and investment and whatever else, and connect these big, broad, international and national issues down to a level in which people can see, okay, I didn't know, but now I know that this housing development at the bottom of my street is actually owned in the Cayman Islands, or whatever issues that might be. And we bring the tangible issues and connect them to the broader sort of socio-political issues. And I think that's a really important part of making things relevant and making things pertinent. Same goes for looking at stories that are particularly meaningful to different subsets of our communities, whether that's students and the big investigation that we did into the universities, fossil fuels and otherwise unethical investments, which eventually resulted in a divestment vote, the practices of immigration enforcement within migrant communities, or school cuts, which particularly is obviously a concern for parents and their children. We also, and we do have a lot of work to do on this, is making our language and our presentation as engaging and accessible as possible. I think this is a really, really key aspect of journalism, at least from our perspective, is that we don't compromise on the quality, but we make it as accessible as possible. I think there's a pervasive misconception that making things complicated is a mark of quality, and that's definitely not something that we agree with. As well as that, we also have translated, like dual language pieces. So we've had items that have been translated into Somali and English, Spanish and English, Polish and English, Arabic and English, and they appear in the print and online with issues that, in whichever way, have a particular relevance to that particular subset of our community. And then also alongside the different investigations and features which deal with heavier issues, we have different histories, which are unseen or unknown for the most part in our city, voices, so personal experience of hardship or of something inspirational, round tables, for example, Kurdish exiles Kurdish refugees living in exile talking about the experience of seeing their homeland on the news every day, but being totally disconnected from it, and also solutions-based journalism, whether that's trialing safe injection zones on a citywide basis, taking the bus services into municipal ownership, or what have you. And so, in summary, what our approach is, and at the moment we could be doing a lot better, and in terms of our sustainability, we're making about 60% of what we spend, although our spending is tamped down by our being our own worst bosses and not paying ourselves like anything. is to have the basic principle is a multi-leveled offer of journalism and community. That of journalism that has social and political pertinence, but also relevance and proximity to the people around it. And at the same time provides a context. So it's localized, but it is also intricately connected and intrinsically connected to the national and even international developments. And then things that have tangible impact. So whether that's uncovering documents that forces the council to take a look at a planning decision, or covering so thoroughly campaigns around air pollution, or the idea to have a inner city diesel generator power station such that a campaign builds around it. That's tangible impact which creates a community of interest and a community of values around what we're doing. The other thing is social network building. It can be a very social environment. You learn together, you read together, you participate in events together, you discuss together, and you become friends. And then there's the learning and the leisure opportunities, such as skills-based stuff, but also music and film and so on. So it becomes a kind of a holistic experience that is rooted in media and rooted in community building around public interest journalism. And then material benefits, you can get like 10 or 20% off your latte or your orange juice at some cafes around Bristol. And so with all of that, we're trying to create basically a package, essentially, that appeals to both people's values and ethics on like the broadest level, their sort of personal interests in their city, their hobbies, their social lives, and overall, we're aiming to make it a successful community rooted around the Bristol Cable as its anchor. So as I say, at the moment, we've got 1,700 members who pay, on average, £2.50 a month, so we're not talking a lot of money. We make some advertising income in our print edition, which is governed by an ethical advertising charter, which was decided by members. And we've had some grant funding and done some crowdfunding as well. And so basically, that's where we're at. And the overall aim for us is to trial and prove the model in Bristol and replicate it in other cities. And we've had a lot of interest from people across the UK and even across the country who are thinking, how can we do this here? How can we learn basically from what we've done at the Bristol Cable and leapfrog a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the bits and bobs that we got bogged down in to make this a much more streamlined and much more efficient, both in terms of time and money and stress, endeavour, and eventually have some sort of federation or network of media cooperatives that serve cities on a local level. So thank you very much. I'll be free to take questions at the end.
And so now to you, Hazel. So New Internationalist obviously is a bit more of an established outlet than the Ferret or the Cable, but I guess in terms of this kind of deep engagement with readership and community, especially in terms of co-ownership, you're probably newer in some ways than the other guys. So if you could tell us a bit about the pitfalls or challenges you guys are facing there.
Yeah. This is New Internationalist for people who might not have seen us or heard of us. And we specialise in global journalism with a focus on equality and justice. So our community is a global community of readers with about half are spread between Australia, Canada and the US, and obviously throughout Britain as well and other parts of the world. So there's already a big difference there in terms of how we approach the engagement issue. We've always had a diversified business model, so we have a shop, an ethical shop, which sells products, and the idea is that that will subsidise the magazine, although it doesn't always. And we also publish books. So we're professionalised. We've got 13 full-time equivalent staff. Our turnover's just over 2 million a year. That's inflated by the shop, really. A lot of that goes in and goes straight out again. And they're all ethical products from fair trade producers. So they're all based around the same principles of like social justice and reproducing the kind of world that we'd like to live in and the kind of world that our journalism represents and fights for. So yeah, we bring out 10 magazines a year, 12 books last year. So we're already doing a lot of stuff. So it isn't a case of like starting small and scaling up. It's a case of already being a medium-sized organisation with a lot of pans on the fire. So the reason I'm here then is that I helped to run a community share offer in March of this year. And this meant we opened up our media organisation to ownership by our readers and supporters in return for investment. And I'll come on to how that works a little bit later. So we ran the share offer campaign on Crowdfunder. Our target was $500,000. It was all or nothing. So we'd worked out really wasn't worth getting any less than that to do the changes we wanted to do. We had 36 days to do it in. As it turns out, we raised over 700,000, and we've now got, I let it out earlier on already, but 3,600 co-owners, some of whom may be on the panel. I don't know if there's any co-owners in the audience, but there's often people pop up at talks and events who are co-owners, which is nice. Yeah, we just didn't know what was going to happen. We set this target. We knew we've got 25,000 subscribers, so we knew we had a good base to start with, but we hadn't really come to them with anything like this before. And we'd been much more traditional. We had our backbone of direct debits, and that was how we dealt with people, the letters page, and a lively community on Facebook and Twitter, but nothing more than that, and a very small sort of friends scheme. And we didn't have any benefactors like waiting in the wings with a checkbook, which I think in a lot of these community share offers, there's often some people lined up who were kind of ready, or relationships with trust, and we didn't have any of those, so we really were putting our faith in our readers, really. And yes, it was a big experiment in community engagement. It worked, luckily. And in many ways, it sort of crystallised our community around us in a way that it hadn't before. So I've been going to these talks about small magazines and print magazines and how they stay in business for years. And a lot of the time people talk about, oh, you've got a brand and a community, and the magazine is just one manifestation of that. And it's never really, I don't know if it's because I'm an editor, so words like brand, I don't like them or something. But now I start to understand now that there is a community of people who share our values, who think like us, and want to be part of something. But we had to do it in a way you can read it or hear it and it doesn't make sense, and you often hear it in quite corporate context, but it's quite interesting to see it work for us. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how we did it, what worked, and the impact of this new ownership structure on engagement. When is this session finishing? Okay, I'll be quick. So community share offers, if people have heard of them, they're quite an exciting hack of a more conventional capitalist shares. So they're ways for communities of interest to buy an asset. So famously, or you may have heard that Hastings Pier was bought by the community, AFC Wimbledon. That club was founded with a community share offer after Wimbledon was sold to Milton Keynes. That's my football team, by the way, so that's a sore point. And in return, the idea is that in return for your shares, you have a say over how the cooperative is run. And they can only be run by cooperative societies or community benefit societies. So you have a certain structure that you have to set up of rules before you can do them. A very important point is that you can't sell those shares. They're withdrawable share capital, which you may or may not make your money back on. You may or may not make interest, and you may or may not get your money back. There's no guarantees. And all shareholders have an equal vote no matter how much money they put in. And that's, I think, particularly interesting at a time with highly concentrated media ownership. Probably I don't need to say this to this room, but 70% of national papers owned by 3 companies. And this is a global phenomenon as well. It's not just the UK, and we're not even the worst. So a community share offer is kind of exploding in the opposite direction to media concentration. There were precedents of doing it. Positive News did it 2 years ago, and also the Community Media Channel, but ours was the biggest, as in the highest target. But they really paved the way, I think, for this. And the way we set it, the minimum limit was £50. That was the minimum you can invest. We agonised a lot about that, but we felt there had to be a serious amount of money in a way. And there was no upper limit. As it turned out, the biggest was 16,000. And in return, when people invested, they became custodians of our mission which around socially conscious global journalism, and this is enshrined in a charter. And we've already got things like our ethical advertising policy and all this structural stuff, but that's all enshrined in there. So we can't go off mission without them approving, and they can't take us off mission without the workers approving, is the way it's set up. They can also join a common council, which we haven't set up yet. So all the stuff you're describing, I was like busy writing it all down because we don't really know how it's going to work yet. And so the common council is a more active space for involvement and influence. So it took a long time to convert. The way it works is we're a workers' co-op, New Internationalist Publications. We're owned by a trust, so like a subsidiary arrangement, but we are also the board of the trust. So it's just the way it works. So now the cooperative society is the new board made up of us, not the new organisation made up of workers and investors. And that's the parent company for New Internationalist Publications, which still runs as a workers' co-op. So yes, we've run as a workers' co-op since the 80s. We know all about being democratic decision-making, or at least attempts at democratic decision-making and consensus internally, but it's definitely new for us to be held accountable to an external, wider group of stakeholders, because in many ways a workers' co-op, although it has radical principles built within it, it can be quite insular. You don't have to, it's almost like it's your own company, right? You decide, and that isn't the case now. So it's a big change for us and a big sacrifice in a way, I suppose, of workers' rights over what we could and couldn't do, and now it's a big shift that we now are accountable to a much larger group. But I think it's a good one, and I think it'll be good for us as well. But say people who've been in the company for 25 years, it took a while to come around to that idea, and they were very much on the side of entryism and how can we protect ourselves and stop ourselves being taken over. So how did we reach people? So our starting point is that we have around 225,000 subscribers globally. We don't control all those lists, so we only have our 12,000 subscribers in the UK that we can market to, but the others we had to kind of beg the other sort of franchise arrangements to do it for us, which wasn't as easy as I thought. But our website attracts around 2 million visitors a year. And we're a funny mix of low profile, quite low profile in some ways, because we've always been subscriber based, quite a small presence on the newsstands, but we're also an institution in that we've been going so long, we're still going, and we're well loved, especially among the older generations. So we actually launched the CSO with our 500th edition. So that was like a nice, we've got to this point, take us forward into the future. And we also, I would say, have a wide community of campaigning organisations and activists who share our politics but may not necessarily read us, but would still feel very much on board with our message. So how did we do it? I mean, it was just an insane amount of work, I can just say that. Because it's such a public thing, you see, the idea of failing like that, being the second diver, it's just not really, from the video, it's just not something you want to countenance. So we reached out by our print magazine. That's, those are like the big guns really. March edition, April edition. We had email lists, 13 email lists, which brought in on average about 10 to 15,000 per email. Sent about 9 of those. We even telephoned some of our subscribers in a friendly way to check if they'd heard about the opportunity to invest in New Internationalists. They took that well. And before that, I should say, we worked really hard on defining our USP. Who are we? What makes us special? What makes us different? And a lot of that was around, so the key ask was, help us do more on the one hand and help us be profitable in the long term. And sort of weather this digital storm, which as a small organisation we've got less. We're not the Guardian, we can't lose money for long, essentially. And a lot of that was around independence and articulating what you get from independent media, the ability to be critical, being able to insist on the evidence, to take time on the stories that matter, embrace complexity and involve those unheard voices that you won't get from other publications. And luckily for us, the things, unluckily for the world, luckily for us, the things that were going on in the world at that point, very much through those, made the case for us really for independent media. You had Trump, calling everything fake news. You had the issue. You had fake news itself. You had Murdoch launching the B Sky B bid. You had Brexit that triggered Article 50 during this share offer. So if you had, if you wanted. We made the case for journalism that can bring people together and not divide people. So this was, the messaging was tied up to what was happening in the world. We also, of course, made a video, obligatory video, that showed us in the best light, lots of light in the best light. And we brought in all our contributors from obscure places, like the journalists who can't get their sort of pieces about factions in Libya covered by anyone else. We will cover those unreported stories, and those people appreciate it. So we got them to tell our audience what was good about us. And we had journalists from the Global South as well, saying what they valued about having the chance to write for us. And then also we had some impact in there around the West Papua campaign, it just turned out, and we asked him if he would, one of the leaders of the West Papua campaign, would happen to share our office block in Oxford, if he could share his experience of like being featured in the magazine. He said, "Oh well, of course, magazine saved my life in 2002." It's like, really? Could you say that on camera? And so he talks about that, and these were things that we hadn't. And this was how it really brought people together. So they were sat in the office next door to us, but we hadn't talked to him before about all that, even though we featured West Papua stories all the time. So it's like it brings people together who are actually, next door. It's a great way to bring people together. And we also got some high-profile endorsements. Some of those people were subscribers already, like Emma Thompson. And then we had some curveballs like Jarvis Cocker, who did a sort of weird Thunderbird impression in the video and like sort of made it funny, which was good because it kind of needed that. And journalists like Lindsay Hilsum, for Channel 4 News, who she wrote for us like in the early days. So she endorsed us. So we had that. And we ran some paid ads on Facebook, but none of the famous lookalike marketing where you market to people who've already invested. We weren't allowed to do that because of our privacy policy. Data policy, but we just served some paid ads to people who liked John Pilger and Billy Bragg, that sort of thing. And we ran regular blogs on our site, wrote updates to our co-owners, who of course went from being supporters to co-owners over the course of those 36 days. We flyered marches, anti-racism march, anti-Brexit march, and we got a lot of advice and support from people who'd done it before. I'd say that is very important. And we put out regular press releases which were picked up by the trade press, local press, even the tech press, but not the nationals, radio, broadcast or newspapers, but that didn't seem to matter, really. And they brought in some investors, not many. So what worked? What engaged our community? So when people gave their reasons, some of them were very moving. People writing things like, "I don't have much to leave my children in financial terms, but I want my legacy to be a world with new internationalists in it, working for peace and justice." This big responsibility. But others also, the issue of trust, came up all the time, that we need balanced journalism, essential to freedom, rights and understanding. And this stuff came up all the time. So that was also really great for us as editors to feel that people appreciated the work that we do. And then there's also the issue of the drama of the crowdfunder. That has its own momentum. You put yourself on the line. Everyone's wondering if you're going to make it. We had this lull in the sort of 300,000 point, which I think is the point I met Tom at an event in Sheffield. And then people meet you at that point. They're like, "Oh God, I better see if I can help that person, or she's going to have a nervous breakdown." So people, and you may also inspire some people too, as well as them feeling sorry for you. But so just the fact that you're out there trying to do something ambitious and that has people respond to that, and they want to help you succeed. So technically speaking, where did the money come from? Of the 700,000, 30% of those investors came from overseas. 3/4 of those investors, those 3,600 investors, gave between £50 and £100, which were the lowest investment amounts. And that was really interesting because this was really driven by ordinary people. We had one investment from the phone co-op, 10,000. And then the biggest check came from that Norman in Canada, that was 16,000, he's a subscriber. And the second was from a man in Finland, a retired professor, who said he wasn't running a car now and could scrape some money together, which hopefully he was playing it down, and he did actually have some money in the bank to invest. But really driven by ordinary people, and that was very inspiring. And then 25% of it was actually offline, as it came in checks. And that, checks with little stickers of cats on, like my granny used to use, and with people's addresses. and spidery hands. So these are people who aren't going to be digitally engaged in any sort of engagement strategy, so that poses a challenge. This is the most interesting statistic for us, is that just under 60% of people who invested were subscribers, which leaves 40% who weren't. Where did they come from? We're not even that sure, where everybody came from. So it was some sort of magic, some sort of crowdfunder alchemy thing that brought all these people together. Interestingly, our social media, Facebook and Twitter, didn't increase much while all this was going on, which obviously we had loads of traffic around it. And it did for positive news. So it makes me think that we perhaps converted our online readers who'd never contributed anything but still felt involved, that perhaps they were some of the people. We still need to survey our investors and find out. So new kind of community, I'll just quickly sum up. When people invested, they became part of the campaign. So actually, we hit the target on the Sunday before the Thursday deadline at 10:10. I was in my house. I knew we were about to hit it, and I was trying to write the message that was going to go on the crowdfunder page, but it was my neighbour who actually texted me and told me that we'd hit the target before I even realised. So people all get involved and are invested. And then that's carried on. That's permanent change. So it's brought all sorts of new people into our community who weren't the people I described before, like, for example, people involved in tech co-ops who are really interested in the governance model, who weren't previously interested in journalism at all. So they're talking to us about platform co-ops and distributed models of global co-ops and different tech solutions we could have for engagement. And they're a completely new community for us. And then we're still in the research phase and all that. But then we don't know for sure yet how we're going to engage those people who prefer to communicate offline, because that's expensive if you're going to be writing letters all the time, and people wouldn't want us to spend all our money engaging them. So it's, you need a balance. And, there might be an event in London that you want to go to, but you can't, but you could ask a co-owner to represent you at that event, because actually they own a media organisation, so they could also speak for you. So that's nice too. So really, again, it's not a silver bullet. Like you said, it was a one-off. But we do have this sense now that we have a community of owners who can help us find solutions moving forward. And if you want to see any of the stuff we did, if you look up factsandheart.org, which is like our campaign slogan, that links to the crowdfunder page. Or if you Google New Internationalist Crowdfunder, that page is still up if you want to have a look around to see the share off of the legal documents, the rules, and the business plan that went with it.